Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and I am the Associate Director for the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture. Welcome to the sixth episode of the fifth season of the Center's Religion and series. Religion and is a series of monthly conversations between leading academics and practitioners hosted by the Center to engage and enhance critically important conversations on the state of religion in America. The last episode was a far-ranging and really important conversation on religion and Catholic studies hosted by Dr. Peter Tucson and Megan Bowen, and a fantastic panel including Trisha Bruce, Michael Pasquier, and Susan K. Wood. If you didn't get a chance to catch it, please check it out on our YouTube channel, or if you want to listen to this or any episode, we are now available everywhere you download your favorite podcast. The last couple of episodes, we have been blown away by your response, the number of people who have registered, the engagement with our episode resources, and the questions we have received about our research library. And we want to make sure that Religion and is meeting your needs and addressing topics and issues that are resonant with you, your students, and your community. And so while we usually make the evaluation form for our episodes available at the end, we're dropping those evaluations in the chat right now, and we'll remind you at the end, and as well as email you so that you can provide us feedback about today's episode and give us information and insight about what you want to see in the future. Remember also that throughout today's session, we are asking folks to submit questions through the Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see that below. This will enable our hosts and panelists to engage these questions as they facilitate this important conversation. Today's episode will feature a special preview conversation about Christian Smith's forthcoming book, Why Religion Went Obsolete: The Demise of Traditional Faith in America. It was based on a number of surveys and hundreds of interviews, and it will allow for us to talk about this sweeping account of why many Americans have lost faith in traditional religion and why it can be considered obsolete. I am really excited about this conversation, and I'm really eager to introduce our host for today, who is Dr. Brian Steensland. Dr. Brian Steensland is a professor and chair of sociology at Indiana University, Indianapolis. His area of interest include religion, culture, politics, and civic life in contemporary American society. His books include Situating Spirituality, Context, Practice, and Power. He's also written about the new evangelical social engagement, co-edited with Phil Goff, and the failed welfare revolution, America's struggle over guaranteed income policy. He has written a number of articles. He is a master teacher, and he's a wonderful colleague. And I'm so excited that he's going to be leading this conversation today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brian Steensland to introduce our panelists and begin this timely conversation on religion and obsolescence.
Thank you, Joseph. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome Chris Smith and Caroline McGregor to this conversation today, and I'm especially excited for this sneak peek look at Chris's forthcoming book. Christian Smith is the William R. Kenan Jr. Professor of Sociology at Notre Dame University. He is one of the foremost and influential social scientists studying American religion today. Over his career, he's written at least 20 books and many articles covering religion from a variety of angles, including religion and social movements, religion and race, American evangelicalism, a series of really influential books about religion and young people, religion and generosity, parenting and faith transmission, the epistemology of the social sciences, and other small topics like what it means to be human and what it means to study humans. He has a vast array of expertise. His influence also goes beyond his publications. He has mentored and collaborated a generation of younger scholars, and he has been instrumental in the creation of data sets that have powered scores of other studies by people on contemporary American religion. I want to kind of note one thing also that I think this biography reflects. Dr. Smith's career has been devoted to studying American religion because it's important. And I think this is important for our conversation today because the book that we're talking about is about the decline of traditional religion. And I think this book would land a little bit differently if Chris had a history as a secularization theorist or as a secularist or as a new atheist. But that's not the case here. And I think that's really important context for the discussion and the implications of the book. Like I said, the book is forthcoming. I think it comes out in early April. So I encourage you all to put it in your shopping carts or put it on your wish lists. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce my co-host, Carol-Ann McGregor. Dr. McGregor is a sociologist who has published in the areas of religion, especially Catholicism, religion and education, and civic life. And she's currently the vice president, academic, and dean at St. Jerome's University, which is federated with the University of Waterloo in Canada. So welcome to you both. Thank you, and I look forward to this conversation, and I'm just going to dive in. So Chris, I want to talk about a keyword, or ask you about a keyword in your title, the word obsolescence or the word obsolete. And I want to ask why that word and how it's different in its connotations and implications for you than adjacent words, right? So one of the things that you say in the book is that the indicators of religion's decline for anyone tuning into this session have been known for quite a while, right? Whether it's declines in affiliation or membership or belief or what have you. So there's decline, there's secularization, but you use the term obsolete, which I find fascinating and found your explanation of it really compelling. So could you tell us a little bit about that word and what it means for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on. And yeah, so most sociologists and people in general, I think when they think about religious decline or secularization, the word is decline, as you said, and it has this kind of a downward slope image that goes along with it. And the word decline, I find, I mean, it's useful, it's helpful, but it captures a quantitative sense, I think, of less members, fewer churches, changes in people's responses about religious questions and so on, all of which are important. But as I was sort of early on thinking about all this, it struck me that really what was going on most important was in the sphere of culture, not just numbers and survey answers. And so decline didn't quite capture the idea in culture, whereas as I rummaged around for words that might somehow best represent what seemed to be going on out there, I thought obsolescence really hit it well because it conveys a sense that this is very generational in my thinking, that post-boomers religion is just a traditional religion is what I'm talking about here, is something that most post-boomers just no longer felt was useful or needed because other things had superseded it in function. The idea of obsolescence also captures the notion that the thing that's obsolete, many people can still own it or practice it or wear it. It doesn't mean it's gone extinct or that it has no function or use value. There, as I write in the book, like electric typewriters are made obsolete by desktop computers, but they're still totally useful. They still do everything they did, and there's probably still users of them. So I wanted something that would convey this sense of the value of religion and the practice of religion for people who were still into it, while at the same time capturing a kind of a feel, a cultural feel of religion being left behind or lacking resonance or not vibing with the zeitgeist. So
Mm-hmm.
the word obsolescence did that for me. I hope it works.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked about your typewriter example is that you also talked about how, if one still wants to use a typewriter today, it's more complicated because typewriters, like
Mm,
so many things, are a network good, right?
yeah.
So you need to get the ribbon and
Hmm.
you need to know the repair person. And so it's not just even owning the typewriter, it's
Yeah.
all the things that go with the maintenance of the typewriter. And that package is
Hmm.
harder to sustain with some of the supports not being there, right?
Yeah, so that emphasizes the sociological fact that religion is not just something people have beliefs about or that they go do on a day of the week, but that if there's a community dimension, an institutional dimension, or even a relational dimension, it requires enough other people to show up for choir, to have a choir. You know, so yeah, I wanted to get that sense of loss of institutional, social, cultural support for this practice.
Mm-hmm. Great. You have an enormous amount of data that you draw on, and I'd like to turn it over to Carol Ann to talk a little bit about the arsenal of data that you're drawing from for your argument.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And it's a pleasure to be here. Joseph, in his introduction, actually mentioned how much rich data informs the argument that you're making in this book. You've done a new national survey. There are hundreds of interviews with folks from the post-boomer generation. There's some really interesting cultural or textual analysis. I'm not sure how you would describe it in terms of bringing in cultural objects, books, names of artists that really augment the argument that you're making. For the benefit of folks who have not had an opportunity to read the book because it's not been released yet, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that data, and in particular, relative to other big data collection projects that you've done in your career over the years, what really stood out for you this time? What was distinctive, and what really supports your argument about the obsolescence of religion in particular?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say, just by way of recognition, that this kind of project is only possible because hundreds of really great scholars have already done a lot of fantastic work that this builds on. So I really draw a lot on existing scholarship. But then from there, as you said, we did more than 200 interviews with post-boomers around the country. We conducted 4 focus groups. We did a national survey. We selected from the survey respondents people we wanted to interview. I did a lot of secondary analysis of existing survey data. All of that, I would say, focuses on what you may conceive of as the personal dimensions of culture. So culture has both an individual or personal side, but also a public shared side. And any theory of culture has got to be able to account for both of those. So what I just described focuses on personal knowledge, personal values, personal outlooks, beliefs, sensibilities. But the argument is also about public culture here, a shared culture, the zeitgeist. And so for that, we did kind of quasi big data analysis of hundreds of keywords in a huge corpus of media, television, transcripts, just lots of different kinds of media. And sort of tracked over decades the public use of those terms, and as a sort of a blunt instrument way to get at what people were talking about, what became salient in our culture at different times, etc. Did the same thing with number of books published per year, internet hits, by the way, both scholarly publications and popular books, hits on terms on the internet, and so on. So, for example, you take the concept of mindfulness, all right, which comes out of Buddhism mostly, and it really became a huge thing in the early part of this century, and has been critiqued as McMindfulness and has been watered down and all this stuff. But you can do kind of analyses of the use of the term mindfulness in the culture by tracking things on the internet and publications and mass media and so on. So that was kind of fun. I had never done that before. Another piece of the methodology that was new for me, I'd never done a focus group before. So that was a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. And one of the things we did is, unlike focus groups that sort of, focus groups came out of product marketing research. And unlike a lot of that, where it's sort of like, what do you think of this product? Or what do you think of this label? We showed our focus group participants images of lots of different dimensions of religion and not religion and atheism. And we didn't tell them anything. We just said, react to this emotionally. And at first they wanted to explain things cognitively, but after we got them trained to sort of like, how do you react affectively to that image? It was really interesting what people had to say. Our assumption was a lot of Americans at least, relation to religion is how they feel about it, like sort of how their bodies react when they hear and see things. So we wanted to get at it from that angle, meaning this is a huge mixed methods study that what we're trying to get is really hard to access, a zeitgeist. So we tried to approach it from multiple angles, and hopefully what we have is persuasive.
Yeah, this idea of zeitgeist, which connects so much to the methods used in this project, is one that I think we'll return to. But I know Brian has a question for you about the sort of larger social forces that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to ask a data question while we're on it.
Mm.
So you did, this really impressive range of survey questions and interviews. Were there particular responses either in the surveys or in the interviews that are kind of heuristics for thinking about this notion of obsolescence? Like
Uh,
kind of illustrations from what you heard or what you saw.
yeah, I think that there are these common themes, almost cultural memes out there that people draw on. A lot of people actually don't know much about religion, especially if they're post-religious or not religious. They don't have a lot of personal experience to draw on. So either the more religious people would have stories to tell about how bored they were or how they were mistreated or something bad. Like, in other words, one of the dominant themes of obsolescence was religion is supposed to do all these positive things in life, but it doesn't, and it didn't for me. So therefore, I've left it behind.
Hmm.
And people that didn't have personal experience would still, it was still like this cultural storehouse of memes to draw on about how, the Holocaust or the Crusades, all these bad things religion has done. And of course, it was almost like went without saying that clergy are, there's so much in the news constantly about the priest abuse scandal and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the main themes was religion isn't doing what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be good. It's supposed to exercise leadership. It's supposed to provide community and so on. And it's just not doing that. And so at a functionalist level, religion, like Durkheimian functionalism, it's just not doing what it's supposed to do. So why should it be part of my life? The
Mm-hmm.
other interesting thing that we really got from a lot of not religious people was kind of a hostility toward atheism. I think the new atheism went through, like, it was hot for a while and then it kind of got stale and people started questioning. But our distinct sense is that a lot of people who are not interested in religion also find sort of militant atheists to be off-putting because they have the kind of the same zeal and the same absolute assurance about the way things are that they don't like about religion. So it's not so one of the themes of the book is it's not like when people leave religion or don't find religion attractive, they automatically shift over into the serious secularist, materialist, atheist, naturalistic view of the world. No, it's much more complicated than that. And we could talk about that, but yeah, those are some of the themes that hit us.
Yeah, and I have to say those themes, I teach, 19-year-olds, and
Hmm.
when I talk about religion's functions, when I talk about religiosity in the US, a lot of the things that they say, yeah, I think it's valuable in society maybe, but I don't need it. Or,
Hmm.
it's very resonant with some of the things that you described in
Hmm.
your survey results too.
Yeah.
So I want to get to the very, big question of why.
Yeah.
Why did religion go obsolete? And you have a series of chapters that cover this, and there's no way to do justice to the multifaceted nature of your argument. But kind of in a nutshell, you talk about some pretty big, slow-moving societal changes, changes in, educational attainment, changes in family structure, things like that. Then you talk about another category of things related to like how religion itself has been kind of changing over
Hmm.
the past maybe half century or so. And then you talk about what I would call um, religion's kind of self-inflicted wounds, things that
Hmm.
arguably religion has done to itself.
Hmm.
So are there things that you would kind of draw out or highlight or move to the foreground as opposed to the background for us that might kind of help us get a sense of the nested nature of what's
Hmm.
been happening? And then I think we can talk about the zeitgeist more particularly in a sec, but
Yeah.
some of these bigger, slow moving things, can you elaborate on that for a minute?
Yeah, so I conceive of this book as and I write this as a historical cultural sociology. A lot of American historical sociology focuses on politics and democracy and et cetera. So that puts me in the frame that to really understand this obsolescence of traditional religion, we have to look at long-term trends, as you said. And so some of the themes, some of the general themes that I think sort of frame what's going on here, there's a lot of long-term trends that then hit very specific events in history and developments that make changes happen. It's all very highly complex. There's no three silver bullets that explain it all. It's super complex and has to be pulled apart and put back together very carefully. Most of what contributed to religion's obsolescence was unintended. So we know what planned obsolescence is. This wasn't planned. Like this so happened mostly. There were some actors who wanted to undermine religion, but they're relatively small in the larger picture. Most of them were unrelated to religion. I mean, they had everything to do with September 11 and the invention of the digital age and the war on terror and just all, changing demographics of the family. It was not really about religion, but it impinged upon religion. Another thing that I highlight is that this is all very much conditioned by the American context. We're not talking about the playing out of some kind of universal or standard secularization, evolution, or like inevitability of rationalization or whatever. Like this is very particular context that has very particular American features to it, like televangelists and their effect on things. And that all this wraps up. So I describe all this as basically the image of perfect storms. So, but it's not just one perfect storm. It's like multiple perfect storms that at a particular time and place converge together that make it almost overdetermined that religion had to go obsolete. I mean, by the time I got done figuring all this out, I thought, why is anybody still religious at all? Is the amazing thing to me. So, but then but all of these demographic, structural, institutional, technological, political changes, to me, what matters is that they lead to the emergence of a new zeitgeist that I call the millennial zeitgeist that's post-boomer. The Gen X opened up the door and the millennials really developed it out. And so in the end, it's a story about culture, how culture was changed unintentionally in a way that made traditional religion not vibe, not match up with where people were, and so therefore feel obsolete.
Carol Ann, would you like to follow up on that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about this idea of zeitgeist. And actually, as we were getting oriented and prepared for this call, we were joking, zeitgeist is not something you're going to drop into a regression model. So for the folks who may have only encountered this in pop culture context, not in sociological context, can you say a little bit more about how you're using the term zeitgeist in the book and and really in particular this post-millennial zeitgeist? How is it that that explains how religion has become obsolete?
Yeah, so I mean, we know zeitgeist means it's this German word. It means spirit of the age, and so it intends to convey on purpose, even though it's difficult. It intends to convey a sense of an atmosphere, a sensibility, a collective feel of a time period and a place. The word zeitgeist, I say, academics are virtually allergic to the word because it has a history that is problematic all the way from Hegel on. People have used it in a way that's almost mystical or weird or too flat-footed. So, but there's been some recent work in sociology, cultural sociology, trying to rehabilitate the word because and I think here's my logic, and I'm following some others in this that. History is not just one damn thing after another, right? There are periods, there are eras, there are phases, and they have different feels to them. They convey different sensibilities, and different ages of people in those eras have different experiences that they share together. So Zeitgeist tries to capture that. Again, it's very hard to access that. If we're going to be empirical, how in the world do you empirically access a zeitgeist, which goes back to the methodological question. But I think in the end, what struck me sort of in my gut was that it's most post-boomers who are not interested in religion, it's not because they have some kind of rational argument about, you know, you can't believe in God, or there could, a lot of post-boomers believe in all kinds of stuff that you know is not rationally sensible necessarily from a secular point of view. Um, it's really just a feel, it's a vibe of an era, that the era, and I lived through it, although I'm a very young boomer, I lived through it, and so was in a position sort of to observe it, so to speak, develop. And my own kids, my older kids are younger millennials, so there's just a feel, and in one of the chapters I try to explain this through the clothing, the styles, the music, um, the consumerism, and I have a, you know, lists of words that try to describe it. You know, it's focus on the immanent, individualistic, anti-institutional, relativistic, subject, et cetera, et cetera. I think basically, if you grew up as a millennial or a post-boomer at least, you grew up in a culture that had a certain vibe, a zeitgeist, and traditional religion just didn't fit. It just didn't resonate. It didn't jive, you know, with what seemed real, or what seemed, I don't even like the word relevant. That's a very boomer critique of religion. Oh, it's not relevant. It wasn't even that direct. It's just like, why would you, what does this have to do with anything? And then on top of that, you have these other objections like, well, and priests aren't, you know, they're abusing little boys and whatever, so forget it, etc. Yeah, so in short, I'm trying to help rehabilitate this term in a more realistic sociologically useful way.
Yeah, and I would be curious about the zeitgeist and other types of obsolescence. So obviously the focus of the book is the obsolescence of religion, but in your interviews and in the data that you examined, is the millennial zeitgeist making other things obsolete? You know, the institution of marriage, democracy, unions, there are all these kinds of other institutions that don't seem to hold the same place in society that they once did. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there definitely are things that go along with it. Sorting out causes and effects is a little difficult. And one of the things I argue in the book is some things start off as causes and then they become their own effects, so to speak. So not everything can be parsed out in a nice, again, regression model or structural equation model. But clearly part of this was inherited, and then promoted further was trust in institutions, trust in authorities. I mean, that starts back in the, you know, the late 60s, let's say, to oversimplify. But the zeitgeist sort of enhanced it, it moved it forward. And again, this has a lot to do with lots of changes in society, politics and otherwise. So things like that. Changes in the economy and the coming of neoliberal capitalism. Part of the zeitgeist was realizing I'm not going to do as well as my boomer parents did socioeconomically, and so having to come to grips with changes in a vision of what a good life looks like and what the American dream, how much I'm invested in it. So yeah, other things besides traditional religion, the American dream, trust in institutions, trying to live up to a certain standard of or model of what a good life looks like, trying and clearly, again, cause and effect, getting married, settling down, having children, all of that is part of this larger, both as cause and effect, this larger era.
The again, that resonates so much with what I hear from my own students when I talk about religion. I mean, if I'm gonna not adequately capture what you wrote, but it seemed like it's some combination of expressive individualism and the pursuit of like a unique, authentic selfhood,
Mm-hmm.
coupled with pretty pervasive anti-institutionalism that certainly goes beyond religious institutions,
Mm-hmm.
coupled with a kind of economic anxiety and time squeeze that comes from what we might call like hustle culture,
Also culture,
right? And then the digital revolution,
yeah. Mm.
which just completely reshapes our information environment, both as a source of information, as a source of misinformation, as a way to answer questions, often inaccurately, that one might have about faith or religion or the supernatural. And to some degree, those are, those have really accelerated in the last 20 years or so. So I have a question maybe that's going to be a little bit inside baseball for scholars. And it's your own view of religion and secularization. You've been writing about religion for a long time. And when you wrote about obsolescence in the book, you talk about how it was unplanned. And my sense was that you were positioning that against other arguments that you've made in other books, like in the book, The Secular Revolution, where you see secularism or secularization as a process that actually has kind of active proponents as opposed to just kind of being a passive thing that happens as time unfolds, right? And then in your 2017 book, Religion, which, just as a side note, is a terrific book that everyone should also read. Although maybe it's obsolete, I'm not sure. You seem to say, religion is going to be around as long as people have practical problems that they turn to supernatural sources to address. And incidentally, modernity isn't all it's cracked up to be, and so it's not going to be the panacea either. So I kind of left that book, which came out not that long ago, having the sense that you thought religion was going to be around for a while. So I'm curious, just like, and you've actually lived through the 90s and 2000s that you write about in the book as these kind of epochal shifts. Has your view of religion changed, or your view of secularization changed?
Yeah, no, those are really insightful observations, although I would say no. I would say my underlying model of things is still coherent, and that is, first of all, I never have bought into, well, maybe early on, I really reject kind of a quasi-positivist notion that there are these laws of social life and the modernity will bring this, or everything will go this way. My underlying sort of philosophy of social science is critical realism. And so that sets me up to think social life is this ongoing activity and outcome of gobs of causal mechanisms that are operating in the world. Some of them are, when it comes to religion, some of them are secularizing, some of them are very much supportive of religion, some of them are neutral. And how they operate and what effects they have depends very much on context, path dependency, interactions, and so on and so on. So I think that book, this book that we're discussing now, sort of shows that at work. I think it's also consistent with the theory book that, I mean, religion can be both obsolete, and still be around. Like, I don't think religion is going to disappear in the US. It hasn't in Europe or anywhere. So it's still around. It's just a matter of kind of its presence, its place in a culture and a social order. Yeah, so, and again, in this book, there are some actors who were activist, intentional, secularizing activists. They were. They didn't make it all happen. They, in some ways, lucked out that certain things put them in a context that anyone even listened to them in the 2000s. So, yeah, that's kind of how I view it. I think the empirics show us that religion is on the decline. I don't think that's disputable at this point. And in America, in a way that you'll remember in the 90s, there was much more like, oh, free market and rational choice and religious ecologies and really religion. So I think one of the punchlines is the older idea that of American exceptionalism. I think that's gone.
Yeah.
And things have really changed significantly, but it doesn't mean religion's going to disappear. It just means it has a different place in the culture, both functionally and in terms of its like meaning to people, its vibe to people.
One of the other examples of something that's kind of obsolete, I think, that you used was Westerns, meaning Western movies, right?
Western movies, yeah.
And so, typewriters are still around. Westerns, people still watch Westerns on the, specialty streaming, channels.
Yeah.
There's
some really good ones. There's really good ones, and there's great actors, who've acted in them, but somehow we hit a point where they just people don't want to see them any, like
They don't speak to the moment.
resonate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seeing some great questions come in at the chat, and know that we have limited time today and want to get to some of those chat questions too. But this last bit of conversation has reminded me a little bit about thinking about the implications of this book, both for sociologists of religion, but maybe also if there are folks in the audience who are, devoted in their careers in life to traditional American religion, working as clergy, working in churches and congregations. What are some things those folks could take away from this book? Is there something that they could have done to avoid obsolescence? Are there ways to avoid becoming well, can you be more or less obsolete, or is it you are obsolete or you're not obsolete? But any thoughts on the implications for folks working on the ground in traditional American religion?
Yeah, that's a really big question with a lot of dimensions to it. I mean, one thing already, I've given a few early talks on this, and I've had some clergy show up and conversations with them after. I mean, one thing I would say is the sociological perspective enables you to not take it personally that maybe your congregation isn't doing great. There's a big picture with decades of momentum of social changes here. I think a lot of clergy try their very best, and if things don't turn out great, they think, what did I do wrong? Like, what's wrong with my program? Or maybe am I about... And yeah, maybe there are issues there to look at, but the bigger picture here, the context is so much more important to put our individual places in it in perspective. I think it's also valuable to think about cultural obsolescence. As I started off saying, because it's not just a matter of, okay, there are a few people in the pews. There's something going on out there in the culture, in the public culture, that affects individuals in their minds and hearts, that needs to be grasped, that needs to be understood. And my current thinking is, if clergy, say, religious people in seminaries, whatever, want to get this, they need to get out of their normal religious circles and go out in public, maybe 10 hours a week, and just observe, sit down, talk to people, meet people who feel different. Like, do essentially what I did, we do. Clergy can do that. Religious people, actors can do that, and try to really hear the other. I think a lot of clergy schedules keep them so busy with their congregations, they don't have time to get out and listen to people who are really different, who may really not like what they're doing, etc. So that's one point of it. There's a lot that you could look at my story and say, oh, if religion had done X, Y, and Z differently, it would have turned out. The biggest one of those is not have a continual string of scandals about sex and money, and in some cases murder and fraud, coming out in the news about priests and rabbis and pastors and so on. That gets back to what Brian was talking about, the internet, however. Part of this is the context of information sharing has changed radically, so that it's so much easier for somebody to blow the whistle than in the past would have been more likely to cover up, etc. So again, everything's very complex, but religion really did itself a relatively few actors in religious circles did a huge amount of damage and when it came out and went public. Reputationally, it violated what Americans expect from and hope to get out of religion, what they would respect out of religion. So scandals are there. A really puzzling piece of all this is that when we talk, and it's not just our study, like it's all over, there's incredible yearning for community, for connection, for real human interaction, not just virtual, not isolation. COVID has been part of generating this. And, religious communities are a place where historically people have gotten that. You can move in, you're a Methodist, you find the Methodist church, and there's people that you can connect. But something about the zeitgeist makes post-boomers not wary of that. They want community, but they know might mean putting roots down or having commitments that they're not quite ready to do. And some of my own undergrads at Notre Dame, and I've talked about this, say, in their view, a lot of young people don't even know how to make it happen. Like, how would you even do it? How would you get out there and meet people anymore? So the positive way to put that is if religious communities could figure out how to meet people's sense of community and connection and direct human contact without that feeling threatening to people that, now I'm vulnerable, or now I'm sunk, or now I'm overcommitted. That's one point of contact for moving forward, I think. This discussion we could spend hours here talking through these implications. Those are a few thoughts.
Yeah. I've got a question about the implications for people that study religion, as well as people with commitments in the maintenance of organized religion. And so one way of thinking about my question, I think, regards your discussion of enchantment, which I found really valuable because essentially you're arguing that the obsolescence of religion doesn't mean we live in a secular, landscape, right? There is this kind of enchantment area in between organized religion and secularism, if that's the way to graph it, right? So where did that show up for you? Where do you see enchantment? And I guess a slightly different way of asking that is for scholars that are interested in the religious experience, both inside and outside the walls of faith communities, how would we study those enchanted fields, and what does it look like, and what are the implications of the shift toward the enchanted as opposed to the religious, if you will?
Yeah, this was a bit of a revelation to me, so to speak, that realizing how significant this another word for it is occulture, which I get from some British scholars. It doesn't mean cults, it means things hidden and so on. That's a whole other discussion. But yeah, so a couple of big picture thoughts here. So how did it show up? Well, people who said they couldn't handle religious beliefs at all. Next thing they're talking about, willing, like, what's it called? Willing things to come into their life, chakras, like all sorts of interest in vampires, interest in role play games, paganism. Another thing is in the focus groups, there was this definite bias. Anything of traditional American religion too familiar was negatively coded, but sort of Native American religions or dancing or spirituality, that was so cool, or Buddhists were cool. It was just almost this knee-jerk, like one thing is bad, another thing is cool. And so it starts to get you thinking, why is it that this is so attractive? And then you start digging into the literature and you find tons of people have been studying this. There's huge literatures on every dimension of what I'm calling enchantment. In some ways, I feel like just pointing everyone to what's already out there. But then it started to dawn on me that, like, the traditional way that the discussion is structured is this binary, religious versus secular, as you said in asking this question. And so the loss of one is a gain for another. And so if religion is declining, then the secular must be winning. But it was clear that very many post-boomers are suspicious of, as I said, this hardcore atheist, secularist, etc. They still want meaning. They still want a spiritual life. They still want some sense of purpose. And there's a strong attraction to elements of, it's not like religion. It's not like coherently organized, but there's strong attraction to elements like, yes, nature is sacred and we should care about the environment, or that everything is energy and our bodies have energy and we can understand our health through energy. And so manifesting is the word I was trying to get at. Like, we can manifest things into our lives, or we're interested in chakras, or maybe paganism would be cool. So the more I started looking at, the more I saw tons of it out there. And I think the function of it is there's a supply of it, first of all. It's been around for quite a while, but it enables people to exit traditional formal religion without thinking, oh, now I'm the new Richard Dawkins. Like, it enables people to have an identity. I'm still spiritual. I still care about inner things and subjectivity. I still think that the cosmos may have some kind of meaning. So it takes the edge off of the loss of religion, so to speak. Another dimension of that, since I know you've done a lot of studies on spirituality and the spiritual but not religious, I think I could be wrong and correct me, but my sense is, this is my own confession. We've looked at spiritual but not religious as like an entity, a category, because it shows up on survey. We can make surveys make it like that. But I came to see spirituality or being spiritual as part of this larger field of a culture or enchantment. It's just one part of that field, but it's not a separate entity that we need to explain any more than the nuns, let's say, the religious nuns. It's part of and it's connected to it. It interweaves with all this other dimensions of re-enchantment. So in a way, a lot of people that describe themselves as spiritual, they understand themselves to live in a world that's much more enchanted than traditional religious worlds, which to them feel flat and old and dry and boring. So I guess for religious scholars, the spiritual stuff is really valuable and really important. I would encourage us to sort of see it as part of something bigger that we have, that many people have studied, but put the pieces together. Last thing, and then I'll. We know that as academics, we're rewarded for focus, for specialization, for being experts on A, B, or C. And spirituality is one of those, but I think we could do more work putting together pieces into bigger pictures and seeing, like stepping back and seeing the larger cultural landscape. There's a need for both, but sometimes I think we're too, like as I said before, there's gobs of amazing literature out there on paganism and witchcraft and Wicca and everything, vampire subcultures. It's just all separated from each other, but I think it all hangs together actually into something bigger. And I'm writing another book, a follow-up book on that now.
Oh, great. Yeah, one of my colleagues describes the difference. So she says that religion is really organized spirituality. And so if we're going to distinguish between religion and spirituality, religion is really the subset of the much broader a culture, if that's what you want to.
Yeah, I
Right?
guess I would say I think a culture has some substantive differences with traditional Western religions,
Yeah.
especially, Abrahamic. Like it's really a different way of seeing the world. And so if we bring to it what we have as established ways in, say, sociology of religion, of understanding American religion, and apply that as the lens or the categories for understanding a culture, we're going to misunderstand it. Like it requires a retooling to get what it really is.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a few questions come in on the chat, basically on the theme of returning to traditional American religion. The other thing that's often talked about, both in sociology of religion and you read news stories, is things like Christian nationalism, things like fundamentalism. What can we sort of take away from this book in terms of what's the future of Christian nationalism, political polarization? Are they going to become obsolete as generational change happens and religion is obsolete, or are those things likely to be with us for a while longer?
Yeah, good question. I don't want to oversimplify because this is complex stuff, and there are people that know it much better than I do. But one of the religious forces that fed into traditional religion's obsolescence was definitely, especially American evangelicalism and some parts of Catholicism and Judaism, alignment, a politicization, and alignment with especially conservative or right-wing politics, which just seriously turned off huge numbers of moderate, would have been happy to be religious, or maybe not Americans, or at least it gave them a rationale for why religion is sick and bad and to be avoided. So the more, as far as I can tell from my data, the more part of what drove religion into obsolescence was a reaction against basically the Christian right or the religious right in the 80s and 90s and thereafter. So that's morphed into Christian nationalism. My own view is that that's a kind of a reactionary sign of religion's obsolescence. I don't want to be reductionistic here, but I think that there's a sort of a sense of desperation, of vulnerability. And so when the Christian right started, the argument was we need good, righteous people in power. That's been completely abandoned, obviously. Now it's we need somebody in power who's on our side and who will protect us, at least, even if they themselves are a corrupt, immoral, lying person. So Yeah, so it's both of those things. I think religion getting involved in politics was part of the story of why things went south. And I think the ongoing involvement in politics is getting more and more desperate and defensive and protectionist, self-protectionist, which I can understand for some people why it may seem that's a valuable thing, but it's not going to do anything, in my view, to help the long-term sort of vitality and health of traditional religion, at least as those traditions have been inherited and what they claim themselves to be. Yeah, to me, it's a bad mutation. I'll say bad in a normative sense. It's a bad mutation of those traditions, even evangelicalism. It's not evangelicalism. I can't even imagine what it has to do with the person of Jesus. So, yeah, that's just my own. Yeah, so I'll just leave it there.
So, Chris, we have some religion reporters in the chat, so I'm going to give you the chance to set the media agenda. Given your arguments, if you were a beat reporter, what would you want to be covering in the upcoming years?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least to avoid a few mistakes. The first one we've already talked about, which is religion's cultural obsolescence does not mean secularism has won. And I have survey data that'll come out in the next book, secularism as an ideology is still a pretty smallish minority of Americans who are committed to it. So I think the whole re-enchantment and a culture field where people, and there's been reporting on this, and some of it's really good. This whole complex web of wanting to see the world as having sort of an energy inside of it or a force that modernity is blind to. But if we learn some kind of inner secrets or inner knowledge or get our minds straightened out or whatever, we can get in touch with it, and that will be healing for us. That will give us a sense, an appreciation for our lives, etc. Another will be, I think, how traditional religion responds to its obsolescence. One feature, one expression of that, I think, is Christian nationalism. There will be others. Just following, if an institution is sort of not just in decline, but is culturally considered totally outmoded or very outmoded, like how does it respond? How will it change its messaging? How will it reorganize itself? Will it try to reconfigure itself to be more quote unquote relevant to or appealing to the larger culture? I mean, those are a few things, but the thing I most have my brain in now is this re-enchantment stuff, because I just find it completely fascinating. And there's so much more there. For most of my career, I just thought, okay, you want to study pagans, whatever, but that's kind of minor. It doesn't really matter. What matters are things that are big, that have big populations, that are established institutions. And I've really come to see things differently than that, where a lot of the action is semi-underground, semi-hidden. It requires effort to get out and see it happening. And what its consequences will be culturally, institutionally, in terms of civic engagement, like there's so many questions. Where will it go? And there's real disagreements about it. Some people think that spirituality and a culture, as you well know, some people think it's all just a bunch of narcissism. And there's like a new book out by some of Carol Ann's colleagues up there in Canada about no, it's Galen Watts and others, no, there's real public significance to spirituality and so on. I think that those are open questions that are worth following. I guess my biggest intervention would be, though, don't just assume that if religion's in decline, that secularism is won. The world is more complicated. It's not binary like that. The field is much more complex.
Well, I'm going to try. I always try not to be the Canadian that's reading the news and says like 4 Canadians were involved, but you brought Canada up. And so I'm curious, this is obviously a story about American religion, but as you look at the rest of the world, or may have considered other places in the world as part of your work on this book, what is your sense of, is this an exceptionalism story about America, or do you see parallels with things like the Quiet Revolution in Quebec or things that have happened in various places in Europe?
Yeah, I guess I would say there are certain of these forces that are global. I mean, they're like the internet. That's not a national reality, right? So, and the way it operates and affects epistemologies and people's practices are going to be similar across culture. And then there are a whole other set of forces that are very particular to local settings. So even Catholic Chicago says it is very different than Catholic Quebec or Montreal. So it'll really require a focused, contextualized understanding and analysis. I'm afraid I don't know Canada, although maybe I'll be moving to Canada soon for all I know, but I'm afraid I don't know Canada's the context well enough to say. So I guess I would cop out by saying there will be a lot of parallels, but there will be its own unique story for how things play out there, and even at the level of province, not just the nation, but at the level of different provinces.
That makes good sense to me, Brian. We are probably going to get booted out here at 4 o'clock, so
Well,
I don't know if we have any time.
I've got time, I think, for one more question, maybe. So, Chris, would you be willing to kind of share your thoughts on how America might be impacted by religion's obsolescence? We've talked about the implications for religion,
Yeah,
obviously, right? But if you kind of scope out to like religion and the public sphere, do you have any thoughts about where we're headed or what might happen?
yeah. I mean, I don't love prognosticating the future, but based on what we know, and things can, of course, change, the parameters could change, but based on what we know, we've already seen it. I mean, there's a decline in social capital, there's a growth in loneliness, of isolation, so in the short run, at least, community and civic participation will be disrupted, let's say. Whether what emerges, maybe the next zeitgeist or a new version of spirituality, could generate new forms of community and connection, so on, that will revitalize people's relationships and connections and communities and involvements. But in general, where I see things going is kind of a sort of despair about public life, at least for now. Things could change, but sort of a despair about public life. Young people have much more concern about global warming, and the future is just depressing compared to older people. So a pulling inward, a rescuing the meaning of one's own life and not trying to save the world. A focus on one's health and so on. I don't mean this as narcissism. I mean this as a reasonable response to a lack of control and a feeling like the breakdown of institutions, of public input, democracy, voting, etc. I mean, this is happening every day now, so it'll be interesting to see. But I think that there's sort of a pulling back from the public and even a willingness to be isolated and lonely at the cost of not. And part of the zeitgeist is, don't think you're going to make that big a difference. Just enjoy your life. Don't get used, but don't try to do too much. So in the short run, I would expect that lots of different things can happen depending on technology and so on. Beyond that, which I have no idea. We'll just have to see.
Yeah. Well, I think our time has come to an end. There is so much more I would like to talk about, and I'm sure many things that others would like to talk about too. But I'd like to thank Christian Smith for giving us a sneak peek at his book. I'd like to thank Caroline McGregor for helping us enliven the conversation. I want to remind everyone that we've been talking about Chris Smith's forthcoming book, Why Religion Went Obsolete, The Demise of Traditional Faith in America, which will be available in about 6 weeks from Oxford University Press. And I'd like to now remind people of our next Religion and session, which will be next month, also on a Thursday at 3 o'clock. And it will be focusing on religion and Latinx traditions. So thank you to Chris. Thank you for Carol Ann. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. And we'll see you next month.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Good to see you.